Welcome to Bound by Books, a podcast of authors talking all things writing and romance. And today we have a fun one because we are going into the many heroes of Henry. And I'm joined today by Marianne Maria. Hi, Marianne.
Hi.
How are
Hi,
you
how are
doing?
you?
I'm good. I'm
Yes,
good.
we are talking about the many faces of Henry
One day we're
Cavill,
gonna get
like
right.
cavalcade. Yeah,
Cavill.
one day. Anyway, you know, much love, Henry. We're not trying to massacre your name, but we're not actually talking about him as just the actor. This isn't a gush fest about him.
Well, it could
As you
be.
know, well, it can be, and it probably will be a certain time, but that's not the main thrust of what we're talking about. We're talking about hero archetypes
Yes,
in in in
exactly.
the in the world of the creatives, which everybody who's watching usually is.
Yes. So the first archetype that I wanted to talk about was the Stoic grumpy hero because I just released a book, Alien's Mate, in which I have a Stoic grumpy hero. I'm also quite partial to them, and I think it will lead very nicely into our conversation about The Witcher, in which we find a Stoic grumpy hero. But the reason why I love them so much is I think because it takes a certain spunky heroine to break through their walls and to get to the heart of them, and they're usually like
Yep.
mushes underneath. So do you have any of your stoic grumpy heroes?
Yes, I have stoic grumpy heroes. Maybe not grumpy, but just not sure whether or not they are deserving of love, and the world has, and the supernatural world has either jaded them or made them
Mm-hmm.
feel unworthy, or that they just are, because of their situation in the supernatural world, just don't deserve happiness. So they're going to be, you know, grumpus among us,
Who's your
because they're just
favorite from your
um
books?
well, I mean, out of not out of all of them, there's plenty of them, but the most recent one that kind of touched my heart was Aiden
Mm-hmm.
Durant, and he is my the alpha of the Sentinel Brotherhood in the Demon Hunter's Wolf, and he's got the, his father was the alpha, and when he died, everything passed to his shoulders, and he's got a kind of a wayward brother who likes to do things on his own, and they've got all these demons that are coming at them, and they don't know who's summoning them, and they're attacking the sentinels, and then starting to attack humankind as well. So they really have to rally, and he's a little bit grumpy than usual, because he's got to rely on dun 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 the spunky gal who just happens to be the demon hunter, and then it's not just her, it's a whole coven of strong women with all different kinds of powers and skills that some know about and some don't know about. It's an evolution for them
Right.
all, that these wolves, these very, very patriarchal wolves, have to understand that they can't get the job done without the gals. So
I find that
yeah.
that's true too, because you mentioned that he's an alpha, and I find with mine he's also, he's not the commander, but he's further up in the hierarchy and obviously has a lot of responsibilities. And I do find with these particular types of heroes that they have something that weighs them down and almost makes them a little bit vulnerable for all of their alphaness
Yes.
and for all of their responsibility that they have on their shoulders. That's kind of what makes them build up these walls. And then underneath that, there is this layer of almost uncertainty, vulnerability, a little bit insecurity, maybe even of am I
Yep.
good enough? Am I enough for what weighs me down? Do you find
Yep.
that?
In my case, whether it's the an alpha who, isn't sure whether or not they have the ability to take on the responsibilities, or they've had the responsibilities for so long that now, they're it's like all consuming, and
Mm-hmm.
they don't know if they either have the time or the inclination for the love that's knocking on the door,
Right.
or my vampires that have been turned, and they're not even sure if they still have a soul, or that or if they have it in them to be able to have this love relationship, because of all the different impolitic cruelties that are just so entrenched in in my vampire culture, in my vampire world. It's just, some of them want to hold on to the shreds of their humanity, tight-fisted and white-knuckled, they don't want to let that go. So, having allowing themselves to be vulnerable enough to open themselves up to a love, a situation, possible love situation, will they be able to hold on, or is that going to push them over the edge where they become more predator
Right.
than they already are,
Right.
and of course then there are the other ones that just don't give a damn. They're just, they're the pinnacle, the apex of the supernatural world, and everybody else needs to bow down to them. So there's a lot of different dynamics playing,
Yeah.
against my alphas usually. So
And I feel like we get that too. We get a very similar feeling in Henry in playing Geralt in The Witcher, right? Because there
yes,
is that idea that, especially in the first season, where he sees himself as a monster, or that he could be a monster, even though that he's the one
right,
that's supposed to be hunting these monsters. There is this like parallel between him and the monster, almost as if the monsters are like mirrors or reflections of him.
right,
And you
right.
see that struggle happen. And then by the time we get Yennefer coming along and the possibility of this love, even though obviously the story is not romance like we write, there is this romantic element to it. There's
Right.
almost like a sense of doubt with both characters. Like for example, even though, spoiler alert, it has to be this spell. It's almost like the spell is the excuse, right? That neither of
Mm-hmm.
them are, I think, are really feeling like they're deserving of a loving relationship. And so it's a very easy excuse to be like, well, it's the spell that made us feel this way. So now obviously this isn't real.
The other thing is that, the dynamic between the heroine and the hero, and the hero archetype, and then his opposite but equal in Yennefer. She she craves power. So a lot of
Mm-hmm.
some of the shit she does is just completely messed up because she wants power. And
Right.
it's like she's also a mirror for him, because he doesn't he's seen what that has done in the past, and he's trying to teach her, and she doesn't want any part of it,
Mm-hmm.
until they have that moment of vulnerability where they let each other in. And then, like you said, then it's that spell, and they're like, well, we don't belong together, and blah blah blah, and so of course they split off, and of course now we have to wait to see what happens in season 3. So, and I think it's the same thing when he played Charles Brandon, who was
Mm-hmm.
the foil to Henry Tudor in some ways. We discussed it when Henry played this role in the Tudor series. We discussed that Henry VIII was just this whirling dervish of power and charisma and enigmatic personality that blew through core like a hurricane, and it was nothing but this I don't know.
Like a huge personality, a huge
Yeah.
amount of power, and obviously what happens when power corrupts. And then
Yep.
you had this young man who is his foil, who we were talking about, goes through this very big arc in the series of being a much more cavalier, lighthearted ladies' man to eventually being married, and much more jaded. Although he does end up with his mistress, I do believe in that whole arc, learns,
Settled.
yeah, and learns what love actually
Yep.
is.
And then he
And then
dies.
dies, yeah, which
Yeah,
which
and he
is,
dies.
which is heavy in and of itself, but really shows the depth and range that you can have with a hero, right? The
Right. That
amount
he
that,
doesn't have to. I was going to say, it doesn't have to be that whirling dervish of power.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Always.
The whirling dervish of power is boring if it doesn't have a deeper level to it, right?
Right.
Because if it's just a really strong, even if it's on the quote unquote good side, if it's just a really strong character with no layers of vulnerability to them or no emotional depth to them, then it's just a really strong character. And yeah, we might admire them and think that they're attractive, but it doesn't make the same connection, I think, as a vulnerable or emotional hero does.
No, you're right. And in that scenario, you know, Henry VIII had his demons that aided him and made him paranoid and so forth. And you know, and Charles Brandon's character, Cavill's character of Charles Brandon, um, he had gone through all of those levels in the past. And then when he was married to Henry's sister, um, and then she died, I think it was almost like a wake up call to him, which allowed him to be a little bit more um, centered and a little bit more grounded in and also where when he ended up dying of the sweat, that Henry VIII realized that he was his touch tone. And this is what, you know, you and I, you know, the breadth of character evolution that you can have in the different shades of gray in that make up our heroes as we write.
Right.
You know, we were talking that a hero archetype can be multifaceted, both within a genre and across a genre, and it's those nuances that we weave as we write that make our characters either characters we love to hate or characters we love to love. And when something happens to them or they have a breakthrough, it's almost like we viscerally feel it as readers.
Yeah.
You know, at
And
least so, you know, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I was having like a little choking fit before. So if you were
It's all
watching
right.
on YouTube, I apologize for that. But no, I was thinking it's very similar into how I feel about villains, right? A villain that is just out to be pure evil with no grounding motivation can be scary, but is ultimately boring to me. And I feel the
Yes.
same way about heroes, right? So if a hero is just all good or all powerful, and I am thinking of Superman in this instance, I get bored. And that's my biggest
Yeah.
issue with Superman is that I feel like the depth of vulnerability is not there. There's nothing pulling me to him to make me feel more attached to him because he's just so good, right? And a character that's just so good is the equivalent to me of a character that's just so evil. There has to be reasons and motivations behind it.
Yeah. And it also, you know, Superman, where were you? You know, as the building is collapsing on people, you know, it's, I don't know. I think it leaves a lack of expectation
Yeah.
on the part of a reader, and authors have to keep that spark of wanting to be able to turn the page and find out what happens next. Well, if he's always saving the day,
Right.
then they know what's going to happen next. Whatever, however way you wrap it, however way you color it, it's still basically at its core the same.
Yeah.
And this is where we come back to the nuances that we you know, of character development, character evolution, and breadth of style that we
Right.
have been talking about.
And I think with Superman, it does in a certain extent get a pass because there is a, comic element to that where the comic expectations are that we're going to save the day and this is going to be the way it is all the time. But I would say it gets a pass for its past, not for its present. Because again, I'm a Marvel fan, so I make no secret of that. You can see how you can truly get depth of character out of stereotypical characters. Because if you kept those heroes as comic book heroes, stereotypical standard archetypes of comic book heroes, we would never have the Marvel universe that we have today and the breadth of heroes that we have today and heroines. So just when I think for writers out there, when you're thinking about crafting your hero, you can craft them on a certain archetype, right? For example, like I talked about, I crafted them on that stoic, grumpy archetype hero. But if they don't have depth and backstory, whether or not you go into that backstory in the book is irrelevant. You have to know it to be able to then craft a character that's going to be three-dimensional and that's going to have more essence to them than a cookie cutter character would have.
Right. I mean, I early on in my career, I had an author who'd been around much longer than me suggest that I pick up Joseph Campbell's, I believe it's called The Many Faces of Heroes, and
Yes.
to read that book to help you determine and also to see those nuances and how you
Mm-hmm.
craft. I mean, it's not a step one, step two, step one, chisel jaw, step two, broad
Right.
shoulders. No, no, no. No, this completely has to do with inner depth,
Yep. You'll get
and
Hero of a Thousand Faces.
hero of a thousand
Yeah,
faces.
that's
That's right.
Joseph Campbell.
Yeah,
I would
Joseph
also
Campbell.
suggest Young for Jungian archetypes. There's problems with them, but just from an archetypal perspective, you get this. Joseph Campbell and Young are definitely the ones that I would suggest for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they are really helpful in seeing like different types of archetypes, specifically in literature, and then how to craft out of them is the best way I could put it. Like using them as a template. I think about like baking a cake, right? So you have like your foundational recipe of the cake and everything's there and all of your ingredients. But the thing that makes, great cake decorators great is they do the foundation really, really well. And then they design on top of it and create these incredible creations, right? That's kind of what you have to do as a writer. You have this solid foundation of, okay, this is the archetype that I would like to have. But then what am I going to do on top of that? Or what am I going to do differently that's going to make them stand out and make my reader believe that this is a real person?
One of the things that I remember I had, and, because I write YA as well, and most of my books have heroines rather than heroes. I mean, they have a hero in there, but he's second to the gal. Is that the first book, Hollow's End? I had given it to author Millie Taden for her niece, who was, I think, 13 or 14 at the time, and they were going on a trip to Walt Disney World in Florida, and they were taking all of these private safari tours and so forth. And the whole time she was sending me pictures of her niece Angie with her face in the book, and she's like, we're on the middle of a private safari, and she's still reading it. And then when the second book came out, which was Time Turner, it didn't get the same kind of response. And she said to me then, go back and see what you did and the foundation that you built your heroine, which, hero, heroine, same type of thing, the same kind of analogy, which I love that you just did of building the cake. But, what I did to make her so solid and then so vulnerable and so likable, and for people to be able to, the things that were happening with her, whether they were supernatural or not, resonated with people in their own lives and what they went through as teenagers and so forth. So I think that also comes into play too, is making, you have your solid foundation, but you also have to build in that element of vulnerability. I think that's why in a lot of the characters that Henry Cavill plays, we fall in love so much with him, because not just the packaging, but it's the vulnerability that shines through, whether it's, we paint it with words as authors. They do it with a glance, they do it with a look,
Oh my gosh, you just took that out of my brain, because I was just thinking about that as you're talking about it. I was like, there is that moment where Henry does this so beautifully as an actor, where he's playing this, essentially very powerful character, and he'll just do this thing with his eyes where he like kind of like does puppy dog eyes, is how I describe it, where he like glances down and then glances to the side, and it's this huge, just like all the world is in his eyes, all of the emotions are there. And he, as you're describing that, I'm thinking of these moments that I've seen him do on screen, and it gets me every single time, because it just shows that vulnerable depth to that character.
That's exactly what I was talking about. And the way that an actor will bring that to the screen cinematically, we as authors have to do it with the written word.
Exactly.
And have to, and it's, again, it comes back to also show don't tell, because the same way on the screen they're showing you that emotion with that one look or that one move. We have to show our readers the same way. You can't tell somebody that somebody's got the weight of the world on their shoulders. You have to show it,
Exactly.
So yeah.
And when we're talking about heroes, of course, because we're talking about Henry Cavill, but we certainly can talk about heroines as well. there's different archetypes, I think, sometimes for heroines than there are heroes. Like when we think of especially romance heroes, we think of the alpha, we think of the cinnamon roll, we think of the stoic one, we think of the shades of gray. And then with our heroines, we often get like the shy type or the feisty one, you know. We have different classifications, I think, for heroes and heroines. But the thing that I usually love seeing is when somebody like switches it up. When we do have alpha heroines, so that's kind of a gender neutral, I would say, archetype. But when we get like the grumpy heroine, the stoic grumpy heroine, like nothing touches my heart more than that. Or the truly cinnamon roll heroine, or we get the feisty hero, because I love those like gender bending archetypes. We don't see them a lot, but when we do, and when an author does it really well, I think it can be a lot of fun and brilliant. So another thing to consider is just like, you don't have to stay in these more genderized roles. You can kind of switch it up and see what comes of it.
Yep. I did that in Tempt Me, even though I have a, my hero is, his name is Dash Collier, and he's an alpha, and he's, sent to, the Red Veil, which is a vampire club in New York City that I've created. He's pitted with Abigail. Abigail Bigley, and she was turned, in the 1600s, like 1690 something or what have you, and she's a badass bitch. I describe her as being with the elegance of Jackie Kennedy, but an air of fuck with me and I'll eat you, and and she's very classy looking all the time. But she has serious vulnerabilities that she is protecting, and that they kind of feed off of each other, in that, and he ends up cracking the code to get inside, get inside her heart, so to speak. And it's funny because in the next book, the two of them are together, and you move on to the next couple, and I had one reader come back and say, oh, I think she lost her edge. I'm like, no, she didn't. She just polished it.
Nice.
She didn't lose her edge. She just polished it. She still will tear your throat out, as sure as look at you if you do something to hurt people, hers, people that she loves, and or what have you. But she just is not as guarded anymore because she's been freed from that prison. And I think a lot of times, our archetypes, whether they be hero or heroine, they do have some kind of a self-imposed prison that they live in, and that has to that gives them that grumpiness, that's hard, a great way to put hard edge,
That's self-imposed prison. I like that image. That's a really good one to describe characters, especially the ones that have that hardened outer shell. I have a similar thing in Red Alert. My characters there are definitely breaking some of those norms where we have, a vampire who, in traditionally, like, sometimes with vampires, they're concerned about being vampires because they're going to hurt the humans or whatever. But he has that a little bit. He's definitely has some shadows in his past, but he's also like really cool with just being a vampire, and kind of has that cavalier Tudors Henry attitude where he's like, yeah, this is kind of awesome also. And where the heroine is just not taking any of his nonsense at all, not falling for his good looks or his charm, and just calling him out on all of his BS. So it's a lot of fun to have a dynamic where it's not necessarily the traditional one.
Right. Yeah, I agree. I mean, at one point, Abigail gets very frustrated and Tempt Me, and she says, oh, Lord, love a dick. So, it's just, one of those things. So anyway.
That is very Henry and the Tudors also, as Charles Brandon. That is rare, especially at the beginning of the series. That is very much like, he's so charming, and yet that he's just full of it. And partly because it's just youth at that time, where he's just, young and rich and second to the king. is he the king? Yeah, he's king when they start. I couldn't remember.
Yeah, yeah.
And then you just see him go on this journey of becoming a mature person and seeing the world for what it is instead of through the rose-colored glasses. I do love
Yep.
those kinds of storylines too, where it takes us to somebody's growth, because I love to see that in
Mm-hmm.
characters. And
Yep.
I think romance is particularly good at that, at showing somebody, who's maybe more closed off in the beginning and not open to love typically, and then suddenly grows through love and finds themselves more. I think that's one of the real strengths of the romance as a genre as a whole, is showing us character growth and development.
And in the last book of the Sentinel Brotherhood, because there's the Wolf Secret Witch, then there's the Demon Hunter's Wolf, which I spoke about before, but in the last one, which is Never Cry Wolf,
Mm-hmm.
they've got a demon cornered, and
Mm-hmm.
and he's awful at the very in the second book, and then by the third book, it's like, you were talking about villains and therefore
Mm-hmm.
being the opposite side of the same coin of the hero.
Right.
You see the vulnerability in them too, that at one point you almost are rooting for the villain to be absolved,
Mm-hmm.
and for the hero to save them, and for the and for everybody to come out of this better people. But
Mm-hmm.
at some point or another, you have to realize that you can't, that they, even though they've reached that point of where they realize their own insignificance and how small they are in the grand scheme of things, that their quest for power and all the shitty things that they've done to both supernatural and human world alike,
Mm-hmm.
that there has to be some kind of payment for that. And
Right.
that you just can't just all of a sudden have a revelation and have it all be like, oh, that's okay, but so
What advice would you give for writers listening about how to make their characters more impactful in terms of character development, but also emotional depth? Like, what would be your advice?
God, I don't know how to tell anybody else how to write, because there isn't one correct. I mean, other than the actual mechanics of writing,
Mm-hmm.
making sure you're getting the words correct in the correct order. um I wouldn't know what to say to them to that,
Mm-hmm.
because everybody's experiences are different. I know for me, to make my own characters multi nuanced,
Mm-hmm.
is I pull from my own personal experience and my own personal growth and my own personal demons that I have had to overcome in my life, and I either weave that in or project that onto, or in ways that I would think that you would want your characters.
Mm-hmm.
I had one reader say to me once that book boyfriends
Mm-hmm.
are everything that we want our real men to be and more. Well,
Mm-hmm.
it's not just like I said, the chiseled face and the broad shoulders or whatever. We're talking about the way that they react to women, the way that they react to each other, the way that they react to the world in general. Not
Mm-hmm.
that they're perfect, not that they're Superman,
Right.
but that they have this level of growth,
Yeah.
and that you have to show that. It doesn't have to be in book one.
Right.
It could be over the course of a series,
Right.
but just
Mm-hmm.
the only thing I would just recommend is don't make him so arrogant and so swaggering that it turns people off. You have
Right.
to show glimpses of that vulnerability from the get-go, even if it's
Yeah.
just an introspection,
And they
but
need
the,
their
but
have
to,
their emotional quotient needs to be high. You need to have
yes,
a character, especially with your male characters who have emotional intelligence, especially in relation to the females in the book, the women in the book.
what
And
about you? What would you tell somebody?
I think I think drawing from your own experience is a really great way to get that emotional impact in there. And I think if you're a younger person who maybe you don't have as much experience and you're just starting out writing, I do think reading a ton, reading the things that you love, seeing what you love about them, what you don't like, consuming media in different forms is always a good
Yes.
way. So it's really about, I think, getting that experience any way you can, whether it's through your personal experience or through the media and books that you consume, and just kind of being a little analytical about it and saying, okay, why did this resonate with me so much? What did the author do here? What did the director do here? What did the actor do that made me feel this way? And that's why I think we're talking about Henry Cavill, not only because we enjoy the work that he's done, but because I think we both agree he's an attractive man, but he's also a brilliant actor. And watching him
Yes.
on screen gives you that insight into, okay, why do I actually like this character he's playing? It's not just because,
Right.
Geralt is an awesome character, which he is, but it would be a very different character from a different actor. It's the way this actor is portraying the character on screen and the things that he does. For
Right.
example, like I said, that look that he does, that just shows you this glimpse into this vulnerable side. And it's a few seconds worth of film time, but it's so impactful to me that I still think about it. And I've seen him do it a few times in different things he's been in, but specifically in The Witcher, it was just so impactful. And it's more so than all of the awesome fight scenes, which are great. And I love seeing him in that element. And, it's very cool to watch, but it's the smaller moments, I think, that really make the difference. And that's what I would probably say to concentrate on. Where can you put in those small moments that are going to make your
Right.
character three-dimensional and impactful for your
Right.
reader?
I mean, it can be introspection
Mm-hmm.
of things that the character is thinking, or
Mm-hmm.
vice versa. If you're writing in third person, it could be observation from somebody watching the emotion on the hero's face and how it impacts them.
Right.
So it doesn't always have to be something that's coming from the hero themselves. It could be something that a cohort or the love interest is witnessing, and they could be shocked by it. They
Mm-hmm.
could be, that maybe it rocks them to the core, that they could actually see these little chinks in the armor,
Right.
and the reason, part of the reason why we picked Henry Cavill is not just because he's beautiful to look at.
Which he
It's
is.
just because yes, he is. But because of the breadth of work that he has done.
Mm-hmm.
I could say the same thing about Kit Harington, who played Jon Snow in Game of Thrones, but I haven't seen him in anything other than Game of Thrones. So,
Yeah.
you want somebody to, if you want somebody to kind of use as your guinea pig to deconstruct,
Right.
as a, in all the different characters that they have portrayed, just like you would go into a book, or find an author that you love and then read a bunch of different books from a bunch of different series and deconstruct those books
Mm-hmm.
to see what resonated with you. Not to copy. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm not saying plagiarize. I'm
It's
saying
studying. It's
to
studying.
to to understand what worked on you, because if
Yep.
it works on you, chances are, if you tap into that, what worked on you, you will then have that come out in your own writing,
Exactly.
because you're tapping into your own emotion. You're not tapping into the emotion that the author themselves have put into the words. You're tapping into your own personal emotion that those words evoked.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what's important. That's the research that I would say to do.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just like, some authors don't like to read in their own genre when they're active on a project, but will read voraciously in that genre afterwards. I am one who always reads in my genre, but mostly because I've read so many in my genre at this point that would be probably impossible for me to copy because I would be an amalgamation of all of them. There's just too many books that I've consumed at this point. But it's I think it's important to know, not just for like what are reader expectations and what are common tropes in the genre, but also for the nuances of like, why do I love this author so much? What are they doing for me that I can incorporate into my own work in a way that's true to my voice? And I think that's the highest form that we could achieve, because then we are furthering our work and the genre that we're writing in by trying to become, the things that we love and beyond. So yes, always be mindful of plagiarism. You never want to get into a space where like you're stealing somebody's words, but we study works of literature. I was an English major. That's what we do. We study classics because we want to see, you know, why are these so good? Why are they so important to who we are now? And that's kind of the same thing when you're writing. I think you're a reader first, and knowing the essence of your genre is important.
Yes, I agree. I think we've really covered this very well, I think, today. You know,
I'm always amazed like where we're gonna start. I'm like, okay, we're gonna talk about Henry and this is gonna be fun and da 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 da. And then I'm like, oh wow, we got into some good meat here. We got some juice on the bone.
Well, I mean, it wasn't just a gab sesh on Henry Cavill. And, oh, isn't he gorgeous? But giving props to him as a multifaceted, multi-faced, nuanced actor. Which a lot of what there's a lot of schlock out there. There's a lot of crap out there where things are two-dimensional, and stories are two-dimensional and characters are two-dimensional. And I think as far as what he brings to the silver screen in terms of depth and breadth is what we aim for as authors to bring to the written word.
Absolutely. So, and I could not think of a better spot to end than that, because that was well said, Marianne. Yeah. All right, everybody. So thank you for joining us on our adventure as we discovered not only Henry, but also emotional quotient high heroes and heroines. And we hope that you will join us next week and Monday, 12 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, as again, we are Bound by Books. Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Wait! Before you go, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe, and check us out on our website, boundbybookspodcast.com.